welcome to another edition of the Crotchety Old Man Podcast. I'm George Crumley, your host, and we got a very exciting guest today. But before we get into that, Paul, how are we doing today?
Man, I'm 6 feet above, which is about as tall as I'm ever going to get in this life. So life is good right now for me and all of us.
Man, that is just great to hear, man. Like I said, I am super excited about our guest today, Mark Hayes. He's the CEO and founder of Mark Hayes Consulting LLC, which is a media training company. Mark spent nearly 3 decades bringing news and interviews in Dallas, Denver, Detroit, Baltimore, and of course, where many of you may know him is from Atlanta, here in Atlanta, Georgia's on Channel 5. He's a two-time Emmy nominee with other numerous awards and accolades in journalism. But today, Mark is here to talk to us about a new business, which is helping parents of student athletes go from insecure and frustrated conversations to more meaningful, mindful conversations that help them enjoy the pursuit of being a student athlete. Hey, welcome, Mark.
Hey, what a
How
pleasure,
you doing,
gentlemen. So
Mark?
nice to see you. Y'all don't seem so crotchety to me.
Well, it's the day's young.
There you go. There you go. I love it. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Hey, Mark. Obviously, I'd like to start off just kind of talked about your background, but kind of start off by telling me why and how you decided to pursue this new business venture.
Yeah, so, I was at the end of my television career. Television is kind of like for on-air people, it's kind of like being an athlete. At some point, your luster seems to no longer shine, and they can go on without you. So you got to move on to chapter two. So I knew that day was coming. But what catapulted me into this new realm was, the tragic. I we could call it the spiral and downfall of my oldest son. He was incarcerated in August of 2016 after a lengthy battle with opioid addiction and the loss of a child, and I believe some other mental health issues. I haven't been able to get clarity on that yet because he's been in the system, but I believe he's going to need some help with that when he comes home. But after that happened, he's a Howard University graduate, served on the USS Enterprise, and now sits in a Georgia prison. And I was tired. Um, the business had changed a lot. The business of journalism. We couldn't keep up with Facebook and Twitter, and it began just to be, the pursuit of other people's pain for profit. And I was no longer spiritually aligned with that. So I had to find a way to turn, my pain into power. And so when I went back, of course, I beat myself up, my wife and I, about what did we do wrong with our son? How does our son end up in prison? My wife is a former prosecutor, attorney up in, she was a prosecutor up in Washtenaw County, where University of Michigan is. And here in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, she's a prosecutor and just a super smart lady. And we put time and effort into our kids. And, we spent a lot of quality family time together. It's not like these kids were on their own. So, we just kind of tried to figure out, what happened. And, when I looked at it, the communication piece was where I feel like I fell short with my older guy. I just missed some of the signals that he was sending. And I felt like, my superpower is being able to talk to anybody, any place, anywhere about anything. And I needed to refocus that gift and help parents connect on a more dynamic, more meaningful level. Because, I mean, just think about 10 years ago and technology and how much it's changed since, right? I mean, I have an 8-year-old grandson who shows me how to work my iPad. So, I mean, the technology is constantly changing. And as parents, if we're not paying attention to where the kids are, because they're not asking you for the remote on the cable box anymore, right? They're on their pads and their phones and they're watching content there. And you need to know what that content is. You need to know what that music is. And the only way you're going to know is if they tell you. And so that's why that relationship, that bond now has to be tighter than ever because it's as we know, Our society is so unforgiving, especially for black and brown boys.
I mean, you hit so many points. Like I was saying, when I met you, it was so interesting, your story about your son. But and from our perspective, we mainly talk about finances, as I say,
Hmm.
any types of finances. But from a black perspective, you've got to get there. And one of the things we always talk about is that building block. And one of those main things is communication. And here again, Paul being the herbal guy, mental health kind of falls in that same realm. So it's very interesting. That's why I, pursued you to come on the show and talk about these types of things. So, in laying that foundation, just kind of, give me an idea of, as far as not necessarily having the money, but also having the contacts, okay,
Right.
to help you get to where you want to be. Because I mean, you've been, journalist. I mean, you've been on
Yeah.
TV. I mean, that's kind of like the top of the mountain. So talk about that communication, talk about the collaboration, and then talk about how that's transformed you into this business.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great point, George, because everything I've been able to do in my career in television, when I first got out of college, and now after television, has all stemmed from relationships that I formed at some point along the way. And I, the most important thing the most important lesson I thought I ever taught my kids was it's not what you know, it's who you know. And my dad used to tell me that. My dad grew up in the segregated South back in the 50s and went to college in North Carolina in 19, mid 50s when it was frightening, for black men. And he told me that from the beginning of time, life is all about relationships, who you can motivate to want to help you, and people, you, we don't have to be on guard, trust that people are good people until they prove otherwise, right? And I'm raised in New York, so we think everybody's trying to get over on us, right, immediately. But you don't have to approach life like that and look at people as a gift. And I just believe that people come into your lives for a reason. And, like I said, my television jobs were from people that I met at the Black Journalist Conference. Every good job I got, including my job in Detroit, came from someone that I met and struck up a relationship with, and then wanted to help me go further. So, when you talk about the opportunities. And I used to tell my sons this, when you're ready, I probably know somebody or have somebody in my phone that I can pick up and make a call for you and help you get on your way. At least give you some guidance at the very little. If they can't hire you right away, I know there are some people who have that kind of juice. But, for us, at least if I know somebody, especially in a city like Atlanta or Detroit, where there are so many influential African Americans that through the luxury of the television profession, I got to meet and spend quite a bit of time with. So, there are these people out there that we can call and get you moving on your way and help you get opportunity because nobody does it on their own, right? Nobody does amazing things by themselves, right? It all takes a collaborative, it all takes groups, and a group effort, and and everybody rowing in the same direction. And you know, my oldest just never picked that up. My youngest got it. He understood it early, and he worked it on his own. And but it's just weird, having two sons with diametrically opposed outcomes. One's a professional athlete, the other one, is sitting in a Georgia prison, who probably had more talent than the three of us. He played football at Howard University, and just the one time we had a teacher that complained that he was too charming and everybody liked him. I was like, is that a complaint or is that a compliment? I don't get it. But he's just an affable kid, and to see the influence that all these outside forces could have him, those weren't the kind of relationships that I was encouraging him to foster. And um and maybe it was the rebellion. We talk about it from time to time, and he apologizes profusely. But now he understands the value of relationships. um Especially when there was a time, and I believe I shared this story the other night with you, George, is that he was so far away from us here in Metro Atlanta. It was a 4 to 5 hour drive. My mother is elderly. I ran into the former mayor of Atlanta, Bill Campbell, who helped me um, introduce me to someone who I formed a relationship with, who was able to assist us in getting him moved closer to us. And now we can visit him, on a weekly basis if we desire. It's not a hardship at all. And I literally cried when he called me and told me where he was and that this had happened, because that's what relationships are for,
You
and
know what,
and
Mark?
that's what they'll do.
I want to say this first of all. Um, it sounds to me like your son has yet to reach his greatness.
Hmm.
Some of
Yep.
us in life have to take the scenic route,
Yeah.
and I've had to take that scenic route.
Yes.
And I would have to say that your son is on his way to his greatness at some point. Once he gets out of the system. But something you said to me that really struck me was that now these kids are on their iPads, they're on their phones, and so forth. And to me, that sort of diminishes the ability to have relationships with people because you're not talking to folks on the phone.
Nope.
Okay, so how do you being a specialist that you are with communication and
Mhm.
relationships, how do you get around that electronic maze, so to speak?
Yeah. So my grandsons were here for a week earlier this summer, and we were busy, so they didn't have time to get on their phones. So we were throwing a
Right.
football, we were swimming, we were at the aquarium, and we engaged in conversation, right? So my grandson that lives in Virginia, he doesn't see us very often, and we have rules at the dinner table, no phones at the dinner table. My man was hot. Called his mom, said, "I'm ready to come home because they won't let me have my phone at the dinner table." I said, "Well, until your mama come and get you, you can't have your phone at this table." So, it's one of those things that you have to be actionable on. You can't sit around and hope that they get off the phone because that's their world in there. But you have to engage them, because think about the way they're talking. LOL, LMAO. It's all shorthand. It's not interpersonal. No one learns how to give a good firm handshake, look you in the eye. I'm teaching my grandsons that now, because that's how you communicate. That's how people see that the light is on. My son got recruited to go play hockey at a prep school because the coach said to me, "Mr. Hayes, when I talk to your son, the lights were on. He looked me in the eye, gave me a firm handshake. He was fully invested in our conversation, unlike a lot of the other kids that came with your group." And I told him that. And so, we've got to get these kids talking. And I try stuff out on my son, like my oldest. He was training here for last season. And so, whenever I wanted to have a conversation with him, I would lead off with something that interests him, and he loves his music. So I would hear what songs he's playing down in the basement. I'd go back upstairs, Google them, and then come downstairs and start a conversation with him. Like, who is this group again? All right, are these the guys that got arrested for so and so and the thing in Jackson? All right, and next thing you know, he's talking, right? And so now I got him engaged. So once you get him engaged, you can then lead them, because they don't know what you're doing, right? Like, I'm here for an interior motive. I'm trying to find out some information from you. And so I was just trying to figure out where his headspace was, and how he was feeling going into the upcoming season. And so it works like a charm all the time with him. And it works with my grandsons. I talk to them about little league football, or talk to them about cars, whatever their interest is, right? But we got to know what their interests are, right? And the only way we do that is by taking advantage of that quality time, and making sure, like remember the dinner conversations we used to have, right? It didn't used to be all a conversation through the Chick-fil-A drive-through, right? We used to sit at the table, eat, talk to each other, have conversation, exchange ideas. our society is too go get it, gotta have it now. Here's the next activity, youth this, youth that. My kid's gonna be the next this and that, and we've lost that interpersonal connection, and that
Mm,
seems to be, what drives a lot of these disconnects that I see. I'm working with a young man right now, who's having confidence issues, and and part of the problem is, that he's new at this school. So, he's having a difficult time, blending with the team, and, with his new environment, right? Imagine coming someplace and being a good football player in Georgia and then trying to blend in with a group of guys who've been together since the third grade. So, we're struggling and working on, connections and how to be a part of a team, but still, push for your own goals as well. It's okay to be a part of a team and have personal goals as well. So, it's such it, it's such a multifaceted approach from a parent's perspective, right? Because as a parent, if you push too hard, then you get pushed back, right? You don't push hard enough, you don't get the results you want. So you got to find that delicate balance. And it's also nice, to have a third party advocate, a friend, an uncle, a brother, that can also step in, spend time with them, you know, exchange ideas, thoughts, and kind of get a better idea of where they're feeling and where their head is too. Um, you know,
I'm
Conversation. I don't know if you guys saw the story real quick, and then I'll let you get back to your question. But the Stanford goalie, Katie Meyer, young lady who just didn't communicate with her parents and was considering suicide, ended up taking her life because of something she thought might happen with the disciplinary procedure at Stanford. She was the captain of the soccer team at Stanford University. She had her entire life in front of her, and now she's gone because the parents even said on the Today Show interview, we felt like we missed an opportunity, to interact with Katie, and we want parents, to pay better attention and to listen more and to be more involved with their kids. And with with the technology we have now with Zoom and FaceTime, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to look in your kids' eyes and see if they're in trouble because you know them better than anyone.
and I'm kind of glad you kind of changed it and went in that direction with the conversation, because that kind of brings up some some points, because I know when I talked to my grandson, who's he's 15, he's playing baseball, which, first of all, black, you don't have a lot of black baseball players. I
Hmm.
applaud him for that. And so he's the team he's playing on, which is a traveling team. First year playing on this team, he's played on previous teams, but I can see how he's doing. But one of the things I always ask him, so how are you getting along with the other players? How is that? How are they treating you? How are they talking to you? Are they including you in the other conversation? Because from my perspective, that's so important. Your acceptance, not only on the field, but when you're in the dugout, how they're treating,
Right.
because that's going to affect your self-esteem. So kind of walk us through. So parents come to you, obviously, at a certain point where they're not reaching their kids. Is it a 10-point plan you have, or how do you structure a business? Because there's a lot of different situations, I'm sure, that you would run into, everything from
Right.
sexual to drugs to grades to everything that can come up with a student athlete. So
Right.
kind of walk us through how that process works.
Yeah, so in light of that, I wanted to be careful of how I set up, my practice. I'm not, a licensed therapist, right? And I look at myself as more of an interventionist, right? I'm kind of providing, some tools and strategies to help you connect more effectively with your child. So I have a 10-hour course that we take, and I teach the course, and we're getting ready to move it to the permanent platform on Thinkific or Kajabi. I'm still doing my research on that. And then I have coaching sessions 2 times a week. And so during the coaching sessions, after we go through the class work and the curriculum, then we deal with situations. And so we try to talk through and figure out, what are the best ways, for you to get the help that your child needs. Now, it may, if you're dealing with a sexual abuse situation or some sort of bullying, that's going to require you to, get the school involved or, to get some sort of administration involved. That's beyond my pay grade, but I would, I dealt with that at Howard University with my son. Um, he had a situation where someone thought it was funny to light his hand on fire with some rubbing alcohol. And yeah, I don't know what kind of joke that was, but that was a situation where I was not going to sit back and just let that fly, and and my son didn't even tell me about it. So, that makes it even more difficult. So, we focus on the strategies, the tools. I'm a Jack Canfield certified instructor for personal development. It's called the Train the Trainer course, and Jack Canfield, the author of Chicken Soup for the Soul books. Um, I've done several of his courses, and I teach from his Success Principles book for personal development. And so many of these principles, um, almost all of them, as a matter of fact, can be applied to the relationship aspect of us with our children. Are we taking 100% responsibility? Right? Are we in the ain't it awful club and just woe is me? Right? Are we asking our children what we want or what they want or what they need? A lot of us have trouble just asking for what we want. Right? So, are we fully invested, and are we present in our conversations? And we have to be responsible for each and every aspect. I tell parents, plan your conversations with your, don't just call them out of the blue. Have a plan. Right? You don't go into a board meeting, right, and an important meeting at work with no plan. You don't just show up.
Right.
This, at least have an idea as to how you want the conversation to go. So that way, when you get your child on the phone or on FaceTime, there's no dead space. You're not just, winging it, right? Because when we wing it, they're less likely to engage, right? And they're like, oh my God, what do you want? I'm on campus, right? But if we have a plan, hey, I needed to talk to you about so and so, and you're not asking yes or no questions, right? You're asking questions that require some feedback and some thought. And it takes a moment to figure that out and what those are going to be, even if it's just a couple of questions. Hey, just wanted to check on you. How you feeling? How's your headspace? What kind of feedback are you getting on campus? How are your classes going? I know you mentioned that you were having a little bit of struggles in that calculus course. How's that coming now? Are you getting help from coach or from tutoring? Engage them, and then ask them, how's life on campus? You got a girlfriend? Be involved in the things that matter to them. And once they figure out that you're on their side, they'll tell you whatever you want to know. They'll tell
Right.
you everything you need to
Right.
know. They just need to be reminded that you're not the arch enemy.
Right. Mark, you mentioned a couple of things. I like to go back to something that you mentioned, and we hear about it all the time. We've had the Brian Banks story, the Marcus Dixon story.
Yeah.
Um, you had what is his name, Malik St. Hillier. All these guys were accused of sexual assault and rape in the St. Hilliard situation. Nikki Ivano, the one that sued him for rape,
Mm-hmm.
she finally came truthful and found out that the man didn't rape the girl at all. She went
Yeah.
to jail for a year.
Wow.
So how do you consult with parents and the kids that are getting ready to go to college, the athletes in particular, as to
Yeah.
avoid those kinds of situations, because it's a much higher incident for black men and black athletes as it is for the white
Yes.
athletes. And conversely,
Yes.
uh, black athletes are treated more harshly in those situations
Hmm.
than white
No doubt.
athletes. So
No
what do you
doubt.
say?
No doubt. Well, obviously Marcus Dixon, we had Janarlo Wilson here in Atlanta, two high profile cases that we followed. I followed with a fine tooth comb. using those cases as examples for my boys. And when I'm counseling parents, I remind them of these cases and talk to them. And I talk to young men about it too. Whenever I get a group of young men in front of me and remind them, you know, this your life hangs in the balance with the decision you make with these young ladies, right? And you've got to be extra careful and cautious. You can't be engaged in just, wild on campus activity. I mean, there was a time, oh yeah, free love, whatever, right? That time is long gone. That time is long gone because campus assaults, are taken very seriously. And as you mentioned, for us, there's no turning back. And so, the long arm of the law tends to come down much more harshly. I mean, look at all Marcus Dixon lost. He still made it to the NFL, in spite of, having to serve time in prison and then go to Hampton and ended up, in the league. But imagine, that man was going to Vanderbilt. He had a great life ahead of him. And, it was all derailed, because of a bad choice. And, we've got to teach our young men to make smart choices, right? And to have, a little more respect for themselves as well, because you don't need to be in a relationship just because you can, right? You don't need to catch all you can. It's about, I try to tell my boys all throughout their lives, it's about the quality of your relations, not the quantity. All right. That's not the measure of manhood anymore. Right. It's because there's too much stuff going on out here. Right. We got monkeypox now. We got all this other stuff going on out here,
Right.
and the public safety health risks of irresponsible sexual activity should be enough to scare you, much less the law. So,
Now,
I try to remind parents.
go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I try to remind parents of all these stories, and because they're all cautionary tales, and they're frightening at the core. When you sit and watch, like the Brian Banks story, you watch that movie, you're like, oh my lord. Janarlo Wilson, same thing, just frightening. How something that started off we thought was gonna be innocent, right? And we thought everybody was okay. Well, turns out, there's a way we can make it not okay, and it's called the law. You know, and the Georgia, you know, aggressive opportunity, looking for an aggressive opportunity to prosecute young black men. So, yeah, it's something that they definitely have to be cognizant of. Dads have to talk to young men about that. And I used to warn my sons, I was like, treat these young ladies like they're your sister, or like you would want somebody to treat your sister or your cousin. And please don't come back home telling me somebody, you mistreated somebody's daughter, because I'm not on your side for that.
I have a situation where my nephew, as he's gone to Liberty College. This is his first
Hmm.
year.
Hmm.
He's a track star. Matter of fact, he beat Shannon Sharp's state record here in Georgia.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that coaches asked him when he was coming to visit the college was he bringing his girlfriend with him?
Hmm.
And he said, no, he wasn't. Initially he was going to,
Mm.
and he said, well, there's no reason to bring sand to a beach. So
Wow.
I'm listening to the coaches, the administration push these girls off on these brothers, and I
Hmm.
mean, when you're offered that type of gift and activity, what do you do? You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Right.
what would you say about how the administration's responsibility in terms of soliciting this kind of activity with
Yeah.
athletes?
See, that's where it all starts, right? There's nothing that goes on in these college dorms that these coaches don't know about. Absolutely nothing. Willie Jeffries was my coach at Howard University. He knew everything that happened in our dorm before it happened. And he could tell you all about it. He could tell you the details. He could tell you who was there. He could tell you who did what. So, to me, it is irresponsible, but it also gets back, to the whole purpose of, your mission and message here, and that is the money, right? Because they're looking for any way to lure top athletes to their institution, so they can sell more tickets, get more revenue on television, make a bigger splash. If you think about it, college athletics is nothing more than the marketing arm for universities, right? You look at the University of Miami when their football team rose to prominence in the 80s, their admissions shot through the roof because everybody wanted to be down with a winner. Everybody wanted to go to the U. Nobody cared about the University of Miami in the late mid 70s. Right? It wasn't this Harvard of the South. All of a sudden they start winning football games, and next thing their admissions shoot through the roof. I mean, same thing, University of Georgia. They had record admissions and applications. And so marketing is what it comes down, because it's all about the money, right? And these administrators, we have seen over and over again, these coaches are willing to compromise their moral standards, to be able to maintain the lifestyle that they're living. I mean, because even at a place like Liberty, a coach is going to be making good money, right? And there are millions of dollars at stake. Now we're getting these NIL deals. You think that's not gonna have something to do with it? Oh yeah. Oh, by the way, here's some money, and you can go to this club and have this kind of fun.
Let's
I mean, things are really out of whack, out of
you,
whack.
you mentioned millions, Mark. The NCAA reported a record revenue of $519 million in 2020, and that increased in 2021. They had a record $1.6 billion. Now, considering that they're making this kind of money, do you, as an athlete or a former athlete, think that the athletes need to get paid as a result of this kind of money that they're making?
It's a slippery slope. I do and I don't.
Ah,
Because if you pay the football team, you know, who generates a lion's share of the revenue, what do you pay the swim team, right? Who gets parents and a few students at a swim meet, right? Like, so how do you equitably divide the revenue? To me, that's the biggest issue. Like, I think all the students should get something, right? All the student athletes, because they're all pitching in. But how do you divide it equitably? I see SMU um, just started a program where their donor base has come up with a program that they're going to pay each football player and basketball player 35 grand in addition to their athletic scholarship. So imagine an extra, what is that, $140,000 for 4 years, right? Like, your life is set after that. If you don't play it down, you can come out, buy a car, buy a house, and get started with your professional life wherever you end up. So, I think that's a great opportunity. But again, it creates an unfair advantage for certain schools. Like my school, like Howard University, we don't have a donor base that's going to come up with, $35,000 for 80 kids every year, right? So now how do we compete, and how do we recruit against that? How does the University of Memphis recruit against that? Right? When somebody's in their conference. So it creates an unfair, um, competitive advantage for those that have it versus and we get right back to it, the haves and have nots, right? So I think there is something to be said for players that are playing, and all the revenue that's being generated, because right now it's going into coaches' pockets, administrators' pockets, and the young men are the ones who are paying the price, right? Because most of us don't go pro in the NFL. Most of us are going pro as accountants, attorneys. It would be nice to have $140,000 for law school after 4 years of sweating and toiling on the football field, so I could, pay my law school tuition. That would be nice, you know. So, I think there is. I don't think the system is perfect the way they have it now, right? Just whoever has it can pay, and whoever doesn't, well, that's your problem. I just don't think that creates a fair and equitable, um, opportunity for each and every student athlete.
Hey, I just want to remind our audience you're listening to the Crotchety Old Men podcast with our special guest today, Mark Hayes. And Mark's been enlightening us on parent and student athlete conversations, getting them involved early. Because here again, we truly believe that if you want to be financially secure, you've got to start at an early age. And when you jump on that platform and you're going to be an athlete, there's going to be a lot of money involved, but there's also going to be a lot of other things that are going to be involved. And you've got to figure out how to manipulate through this maze as a parent. How do you help your kids, fortify them mentally so they're able to focus on the things that they really need and the things that are going to help them, and which is you as a parent, as a backbone, because they're going to need that source, to continue to fortify themselves and be strong. So, Mark, kind of, sum it up. Tell parent, because obviously we want parents to reach out to you before issues occur. So
Yeah,
tell
absolutely.
parents how they could get in touch with you. How your program is structured. Any other information you want to give to our listening audience?
Absolutely. Before I say that, though, can I just address that last point you
Absolutely.
made? Because it's a great point. We have to be able to talk to our kids about money, especially now for student athletes like juniors and seniors in high school, because they're making decisions based on maybe somebody dangling an NIL deal or somebody not dangling it, right? So if the University of Georgia says, "Oh, they have $25,000 a year for me," but you may not play, and then Kennesaw State says, "Well, we don't quite have that much, but we have we can get you something at some point, but you're going to play for 4 years." Now we have to have that conversation, right? As parents and as responsible, experienced adults, we need to be able to share the pros and cons. And there are no more difficult conversations in a household than those regarding finances. So, that's my goal, is to give parents some strategies and tools to help them understand how to connect, right, and how to have a conversation where both sides can feel respected and listened to and coveted and valued at the end of the conversation. And that way, we take the emotion out of it, and now we're making our decisions based on good solid information and based on experience from people that trust and love us. And so I think that is the way to start helping our athletes go into college with a mindset for success. Parents can reach out to me and set up a call at varsityconnects.com. We have the website there. You can go right down to book a call, and we do a Zoom and look at your needs. And our program is set up as a digital curriculum. We've got a 10-hour intensive training course along with 2 weekly coaching sessions that are scheduled, one in the afternoon, one in the evening, based on a parent's schedule. So we try to make time for everyone to get in there. And it's an experiential based course. I'm releasing podcasts from former pro athletes and others that have played sports and track and field, and at a high level, who understand how difficult the competitive life of a college athlete is. And a lot of parents don't understand that. And so I'm talking to people and sharing that knowledge with parents so they understand what their child is going through when they get on campus, because you have to start there. You have to know about the pressures that they're facing. I had one young man, he was interning for me last semester, and I asked him for a list of and he plays for James Madison, FBS powerhouse. I asked him for a list of the things that you guys talk about in the dorms that like worry you. The list was a page long. Like he had, I was like, I was scrolling down the page, and it was everything from money to relationships with young ladies, sex, difficult coaches, right? Blending into on campus life, right? Time management, right? Life after football, right? I mean, you're at James Madison. You see guys that are going to the pros, and you can kind of judge. Well, am I as good as him? Because there are guys from James Madison that are coming out and doing really good things, and they expect to win. So the pressure is there. So as parents, we have to understand what this pressure cooker looks like so that we can be the support system that they come to. In my case, my son found a different kind of support, which ultimately led to his downfall. And so that's where this was born, to help parents connect, so that they are the primary source of inspiration and guidance for their future.
Great, great, great
George,
story.
do we have one time for one more question?
Sure.
Absolutely,
I,
absolutely.
I, I, I hate to see this party end, to tell you the truth. But I wanted to ask you because I've had a similar march as you, Mark. I've gone
Mhm.
through, I was a journalist at PBS. Um, I've done my thing with Dave Rambo, which I'm pretty sure you remember from Detroit. Had For
Yeah,
My
yeah.
People. Um, one of the things that struck me as a journalist was the image of the black man and
Mhm.
what you had to do. You had to shave your face. You couldn't wear an afro. You couldn't wear any fly suits.
Mhm.
Um, and then we look at the schools. We look at what kind of books are in the schools. You had Little Black Sambo when I was coming up. Um, you had T.D. Rice with the black face. He was the one that came up with the black face. And then you had D.W. Griffith, uh, that really created the savage caricature that we are so heavily stamped with. Okay,
Mhm.
so you as an athlete, and then you as a journalist, how did you get around those caricatures, and what did you do to circumvent the kinds of caricatures that we've had to deal with as journalists, and we've also had to
Right.
deal with as sports athletes?
Yeah, that's there is so much to unpack there. But first, let me say this, and my dad and I used to watch the pro football games, and we would watch the interviews because I was always interested in the interview part of the game. And my dad would say, "Well, count the knows." All right, how many times a player says we were playing really well, and then we just started getting into a rhythm, and and so my dad said, is just a crutch, right? You don't need crutches, right? Get your thought out. You only got a few seconds. So get your thought out and don't be the stereotypical kind of athlete that we see, because that's what they want you to do, right? They want you to be unprepared when you come in front of the camera. So I've been cognizant of that from the very beginning. But to answer your question, what I did was to find myself a mentor, and I found someone who was very successful in the business. God bless him and God rest his soul. His name was Reggie Harris. And he would he was working in New York City. He would take my phone calls. He would look at my crappy resume reels and give me all the feedback. He told me what kind of clothes to wear and not to wear. And more importantly, he told me why. And I'll never forget, I was at a black journalist event, and a white news director told me, you might want to go ahead and shave your mustache. And literally, like, I got hired, like, literally a month later. So they have very different ideas. That's why you don't see a lot of dark skinned males on television, right? They have a very specific idea of what looks good to them in terms of the black male. And they don't deviate from it. They pretty much stick with that formula, and they don't realize that we come in all different hues, and that we are not a monolith. And I think that they struggle with that. And then and for us, it creates a whole nother divide, because we look at it and we still deal with colorism, right? And dark skin versus light skin. And so you know what they do is to continue to perpetuate the stereotypes and myths. And I thought that being a part of it, I could help change that by young people and people in the community seeing me on television, that would start to change that. but I was sadly mistaken. I had so little power on the inside, even when it just came to editorial decisions, And I'm like, do we really want to cover this community this way? And people would look at you like, well, why wouldn't we? And it 28 years of that, it gets old fast. And I realized at the end, that I had my efforts had run their course, and there was going to be even African Americans in management in the highest places as general managers were very reluctant, to make change. And I get it, you're making good money, but at some point, when does the good of our community take priority? And it so rarely does. That's why I encourage, when I speak to young black college kids, I'm like, get into management. We don't need you in front of the camera. We need you behind the camera, because those are the people who decide, how crazy we're going to look at 5 o'clock on the news, right? And how they're going to portray these different stories. And you look at the way, we cover story, news is covered. It's totally different the way when it happens outside the perimeter versus when it happens down on Bolton Road or in the West End. And that image of us. And you're right, Paul, because D.W. Griffith and Birth of a Nation. I mean, people have no idea of the effect of that movie, right? And how brutal it made us look, and how savage, and how it stuck around for all this time. It still resonates. You can still turn on, you know, multi-million-dollar productions and see remnants of it. Like you look at a show like Power, which is a very popular show, but why are we the criminal masterminds behind it? Why aren't we the law enforcement? Chasing an Italian mob or something like that, right? We're the criminal element, and that becomes our enjoyment. Snowfall is another one. And I get it's based a little bit on truth, and the CIA and the Contras and that whole thing, and the influx of crack into South Central. But the way the media has portrayed us has done so much damage. And I really believe, and then I'll wrap it up, but I really believe that our young people are going to be the key to our communities coming together, because they're not prisoners of the remote control box, right? They're able to watch the content that they enjoy. So when they watch Lil Wayne or they watch Young Jeezy, it's because they enjoy that music, right? Not because they're being forced to watch something like Cops, or some show that makes us look, who is the baby's daddy, right? Maury or whatever. Yeah, and all these shows, that depict us in such a horrible light. Our young people are not being forced to watch that. They got too many choices, right? So they're watching what they enjoy, what they relate to, and that gives them a totally different perspective of who we are as a people.
Great information, Mark. I mean, it's been a pleasure. You've definitely met all my expectations once I
Oh, thank you.
invited you to come onto the podcast. As a basis, we've got four pillars that we're based on, which is providing information, education, exposure, and opportunity. And I think you've hit on all of them. I mean, it's so important that parents listen to this and get an understanding from someone that has gone through this
Mhm.
and understands the importance of communication with your children, whether student athletes or not. But it's
Yep.
communication is such a key. And if we're going to start to progress as Black folks, we've got to start with communication, because
Yes.
that leads to the financial aspect of life, as we know it. But here
Yep.
again, I want to thank you for your contributions, and definitely would like to put a pencil mark in and say maybe we can have you back one day, because there's a bunch of subjects I'm sure that PC wanted to hit on, and you brought a lot of things to my mind also. But here again,
Well, let's
the
do
Crotchet
it.
of Man podcast. We're here to to educate and provide you with information, which you've done today. And PC, before we give our our closing, you got any words of wisdom for us?
First of all, I'd like to thank Mark and his candor. You don't catch a lot of cats with the kind of candor that Mark has had And as a result of his candor, uh, he's been a blessing to me, and I'm sure he's been a blessing to our listening audience. And so I appreciate you, and I also want to give a positive thought with regard to your son
Oh,
and
thank you.
the kinds of challenges and the kind of road that he's going to take after he gets out. And I think that's important. You know, if there's anything we can do to help support the brother, we're at your service as well.
Oh, thank you so much.
Uh,
I
the
appreciate
closing for the day is: he who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life.
it.
Thanks,
Amen.
Paul. So as we
Amen.
say, if you didn't know before, now you
Now
know.
you know.
Peace.
Peace.
You have been listening to the Crotchety Old Men Podcast, produced in conjunction with the Crotchety Old Men Podcast, LLC. The information contained in this podcast is provided for your listening enjoyment, as well as to provide information, education, opportunity, and exposure in the complicated world of finance. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform, including Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, or Spotify. For questions regarding this episode or any other episode, please contact us at info@thecrotchetyoldmenpodcast.com or visit our website at thecrotchetyoldmenpodcast.com.